Yuri, tell me please, do you see positive signals for us and negative ones for the Kremlin?
Absolutely. I think the fact that we're looking at having military aid from the United States resumed in any way, shape, size, or form is a victory for Ukraine. Yes, we can argue about what was the cause, whether this was something that President Trump knew firsthand about and authorized, or maybe he was completely left in the dark because Mr. Elbridge Colby is the real president of the United States. That's a conversation for, that's the next thing that to look at. But first, absolutely, we need to acknowledge that this is a victory for everybody who provided pressure on behalf of Ukraine, democracy, the United States national security interests on the White House, on Pentagon. And so they cracked and they had to resume, or at least say that they're resuming aid. And that's the question is how much, when, and what's going to be happening after that. Because with prior administration, whose name shall not be mentioned, we saw that there were several large aid packets because the goal of, President Biden was to make sure that Ukraine did not collapse and there was no war between United States and Russia, United States and Russia. And so Ukraine did not lose. There was no war between the United States and Russia. And so on that level, you can say that Biden's goals have been accomplished. Of course, it didn't really solve the problem of stopping Russian aggression, but that may be more than it takes for just one administration. Now we're seeing an administration that is willing to bend over backwards as far as it can possibly go, only to be proven that it's not far enough for Putin. Because Putin is not really interested in settling. For him, compromise is the same as defeat. Agreement, finding middle ground is what weak people do. And he is not weaker, so he doesn't think himself, because, you don't have to worry about consequences of your actions if you have nuclear weapons and lots of money. So Putin is doing what he's doing. Trump seems to be very conflicted by this because I think he simply doesn't understand people who don't value money as much as he does. Because to him, this is an amazing money-making opportunity that is right here in front of him and Putin, and holding together, they can live happily ever after. But instead, Vladimir Putin decided that money is no object. Money is not what this is about. He wants Ukraine. He wants power. He wants land. He wants his empire back. All those Russians. So Trump is exasperated by Putin and his lust for power. It really just kind of amazing that this great song by Boney M did not teach Russian leaders anything. It didn't teach anybody. It was just a great tune. But nonetheless, I think this is a defeat for Kremlin, but we also saw some very powerful people that have emerged to sunlight because of this catastrophe. And we have to acknowledge that there's a Russian word to describe, I believe, what's happening right now in the administration. It's called bardak. It doesn't really refer to a duck in a bar. It just means it's a mess. It's a big mess. Bardak. It's a series of blunders that leads to people's lives being lost, not just in Ukraine, but also in Texas when we saw the aftermath of flood where FEMA was waiting for, I believe, 72 hours for Secretary Noem to sign off on spending money that's over $100,000, and therefore, long story. But we see a very administration's very poor at actually getting things done. And that gives opportunity to people in the so-called, remember how Trump used to fight against deep state? Well, now he has implants in his deep state. And one of them is Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Elbridge Colby, who apparently, according to several stories that have emerged in mainstream media, has a lot of power and really has kind of a very specific isolationist, America alone look at foreign affairs, where he's gotten already in fights with Japanese by demanding that they spend more money than they agreed to previously, and basically looking to shift all of our resources from helping Ukraine, from helping Europe, removing troops from Europe. I mean, this is the vision of Project 2025 slash Elbridge Colby slash Kremlin. It's kind of seems to work together. But nonetheless, he wants to apparently take the troops out of Europe and put all of our efforts in the basket of standing against China. Really ignoring the very simple fact that this is what Chinese actually understand very well, is that Russia must lose because that's going to help everybody else except for China. And that's why China says that they can't let Russia lose, because they know when Russia is shown the door, when Russia is shown that it cannot function in this barbaric way, it will be assigned to China, it will be assigned to Taiwan, it will be assigned to everybody else. Therefore, really the best thing we can do is actually put all our effort in helping Ukraine. This way we will stand up to China as well, which is what Undersecretary Colby seems to be so concerned about. So we have this functionary, this chinovnik, this who has undersecretary who has tremendous amount of power. We have president who says that he's frustrated because his colleague in Russia doesn't value money very much. And altogether we see a terribly incompetent administration that has its priorities all backwards and is not able to fulfill them either.
But Yuri, we see that President Trump recently made headlines by criticizing Putin, pledging new sanctions against Russia. Also, Trump admitted that Putin is talking bullshit. Maybe these signals or steps are new rhetoric by Donald Trump, because earlier we saw only previously warm rhetoric toward Putin. How do you explain this new tone, and is it driven by new, maybe strategic calculation?
I go back a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, when we saw President Trump drop our new super weapon, the F-bomb, that he dropped on Iran and on Israel, and it led to a war, essentially stopping so far. And it seems like it's a very effective weapon. We just saw him deployed against Canada. Canada wanted to, as part of their negotiation technique, wanted to have a new tax against America. Trump said, oh, yeah, this is unacceptable. It's a couple of choice words, and Canada backed off. So there's a point to this. However, it's interesting to see how he uses this kind of a swearing technique in communicating about Putin, because it is Putin that apparently is throwing BS at us. And Trump understands, because he is no fool, that Putin is pulling him around, and this is all a pretense and a game, because 6 conversations later and nothing changed. So it is time for tough words. Were a lot of people who were curious what will happen when Donald Trump will realize that he's not going to get what he wants from Putin, because it's not going to happen. This was kind of predictable. And now Donald Trump is frustrated, and he's waving his arms, and he's showing his palms, and he's saying he's frustrated. So then we see that beyond words, we need to see actions. As again, former President Biden used to say, don't tell me what's important to you, show me your budget. This is a similar situation where we hear words, we hear frustration, we hear President Trump perhaps possibly confused why Putin would not be interested in all the money he could be making. And nonetheless, he's not willing to actually drop even an F-bomb on Putin. The conversation about sanctions is a really good example of what is happening, where it feels like something's happening, but nothing's really happening. The sanctions idea in the first place is based on this crazy idea that we're going to put 500% tariffs on countries that are doing business with Russia if they're buying oil from Russia. Well, Russia sells a lot of cheap oil to, guess who? China and India. So we're going to put 500% tariffs on China and on India. This seems kind of unlikely, and considering that we almost had a trade embargo with China at 145% tariffs levels, it's kind of hard to imagine what will happen at 500% level, because of course China is aiding Russia, and we find Russian chips in Chinese chips in in Russian rockets, and there's all other evidence that China is helping one way or another with drone technology and so on. Russia continued to fight. And this is, it seems like logical that there will be sanctions then, right? Or at least a threat of sanctions that will stop these countries from buying oil and so forth. And then once Russia doesn't have any oil income, it's easy to be a good politician when you have lots of money. But how about, not having lots of money? What are you going to do then? Just rely on nuclear weapons and tanks? Might not be enough to fill the budget to pay for the people with the sticks. So there's some logic there. But what does Trump want? Trump says that he wants all the tools to be at his disposal, so that rather than having just an exclusion saying that if you are aiding Ukraine, for instance, then you can be not covered by those tariffs. You're excused from tariffs if you're helping Ukraine. Nice idea. Maybe China would want to get in on that business. It seems like Ukraine is willing to pay, but instead, Trump just wants to have all the buttons. So if he decides, then there will be a nuclear strike on Putin. But if he doesn't decide, there won't be. And there will be nobody else who will be able to do that but him. What this is really pushing us is to more of a kind of a monarchy, absolutist power trip that our president seems to be on in every possible direction. Because acting and almost looking like a naked emperor and demanding that everybody acknowledge that he is gorgeous and he is amazing and he's, women like him, which we know clearly is not really true. So this is, it's just, I remember back to him insulting Congressman Raskin, calling him ugly for whatever reason. And Congressman Raskin saying, well, clearly I don't line up to the standards of the president and his good relationship with women. So it's we have this naked emperor. The king is naked, but he's well armed. And therefore, he can wave his arms, he can yell, and he can say things, but he can't even drop an F-bomb on Putin. He can't say, Putin is effing with us. Putin, you better effing stop this. That doesn't cost, doesn't cost anything. It's a cost of a tweet, or X. Because what does it cost Trump to say something to Putin that would maybe make Putin think? Because Putin calls Trump, who seems like he possibly before an attack, make sure that everything is fine, and then goes on with a major attack against Ukraine. In fact, after the last conversation, they clearly had a misunderstanding because Putin thought that everything was great and Trump didn't. And so Putin proceeded with a huge another attack on Kiev and other cities, and Trump continues to be even more upset. So they are having problems with communication, but it appears that Putin, perhaps rather than, looking at another one of the many off-ramps that he's been offered over the past 3 years, is just not interested. He's just determined on plowing forward, and that is going to put Trump in front of a very curious decision where some analysts who are, like Vitaly Portnikov, thinks that we might be closer to a nuclear a war between the United States and Russia with Trump in charge than with Biden, simply because Trump has no brakes. The model's been kind of lacking those, but because the pride and so much in ego is so important. And so we are dealing again. See, we started with geopolitics, and now we're looking at like a love relationship between these two older men who are like trying to please each other and please themselves. And we have to discuss this. It's really gross.
But we see really that Grammar sanctions bill is tough and even powerful, but the main questions, as I understood, will Trump use it? But maybe we have something or somebody who can motivate him to act?
Well, theoretically, voters should be motivating him to act. Another thing that could be motivating him is political pressure, kind of a more directly through Congress, Senate, and we see that there's 83 senators. But we saw that Republican senators are really kind of good for nothing because they just voted for a big, beautiful bill that they are now complaining about. It's really remarkable what our politics have gotten to. When we have, I live in Wisconsin, and one of my senators is Tammy Baldwin, but the other one is Ron Johnson, and it's despicable because he voted for this monstrosity, and then he's criticizing it. Well, why'd you vote for it? Because, the logic is always like, well, everything's in there. If we don't do this, then we do this. Da, 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 da. But then why are you criticizing it? Then you voted for it and support it. But that's the Republican Party these days. And so to expect them to go against president on something that he considers important is unlikely. And what may motivate him at this point seems to be Nobel Peace Prize. It's really fascinating how he just greeted leaders of African nations, managed to put himself in another terribly embarrassing moment where he complimented President of Liberia on speaking good English, missing the fact that that this is official language of Liberia because it is started by the freed American slaves. Their capital is Monrovia for President Monroe. So this is their official language. Trump complimented this gentleman and said, "Where did you learn to speak so beautifully English? Beautifully. It's a beautiful oceans, beautiful everything." Anyway, there was probably 5 of them. Yeah, I think there were 5 leaders of African countries. Go figure. And the president of Liberia calmly and wisely said he learned it in Liberia, which is true. Where else would he learn his native tongue? Rather than what apparently other politicians have said in response to this wise man from Liberia, said you should have stood up, you should have walked out. They have things they're there for. First, they all have tariffs to deal with, and they all have rare earth minerals, which they're now offering to President Trump because it's like good manners. And we have rare earth minerals that you may be interested in. But there's more to good manners than that. Because as they were at a press conference, they were asked, are they planning on nominating Donald Trump for Nobel Peace Prize? To which they said, well, we're considering it. Wise men indeed.
And the interesting detail is that Russian propaganda has begun to harshly criticize Trump. In such a tone, does Trump really consider himself the king of the world? Are not they afraid to make Trump evil?
Make Trump what?
Make Trump angry.
Angry, yes. I think they, like I said, it seems that they made peace with the fact that it's just not going to work out with maybe they picked the wrong Trump. Maybe they should have had Donald Jr. Maybe they should have had Eric Trump. Maybe they bet on the wrong Trump. But something is not working with this one. This one's broken. Bring us another one. And they feel like, I guess that's their, this is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expect things to sour at the end, well, that end may come sooner than you think. And at this point, with Putin thinking that he just wants that Ukraine and Trump is, not quite, Trump wants him to stop. He's giving him everything he can, except for taking off sanctions and defrosting Russian money in the West, which are the 2 next things that Lavrov always asks for. When State Secretary Rubio meets with Lavrov and there's like news about, they spoke about something, there's some new development. I'm pretty sure Lavrov says the same thing for the last 3 or 4 years. They want the expansion of NATO, then they want removal of sanctions, then they wanted to get their money back. It's the same thing. Basically, they can't imagine a compromise. And so they have to continue the war. This is the path they put themselves on. And it seemed kind of clear to me when the big war just started in 2022, in big invasion, that Putin is not going to stop with this meat grinder until he takes the entire Russia through it with him. And we see that because of the damage that he's done to Russian economy, to Russian population, the fact that people in Russia are not able to travel by plane because the airports were, concerned about drone attacks. That's not a country that is doing well. Unfortunately, nobody but Russian people in the end and Ukrainian army is going to be doing anything about it. Ukrainian army is not going to be liberating Moscow. That's going to be the job of people of Russia. Because even though, this is a president that might be more decisive simply because he has no brakes and he's not bound by those things like, oh, Russia could never fight America. He's just sorting out his business deals here. But I would imagine, Trump also understands, I suppose, that if we if we unleash nuclear war or big war, that could be a lot of buildings that are destroyed, and that's just not good. I mean, it's just buildings. He values those, real estate. We're having a very interesting and important moment in history here where we are on a precipice of very dangerous and possibly quick developments, because the moment that we were expecting, which is Trump being faced with the fact that Putin is not going to go his way, is here upon us. I think it may take a day, a month, or whatever. It's going to take some amount of time, but it doesn't have to take long before we're going to be in the next chapter of what appears to be a gradually deteriorating relations. And I think Trump will always love Putin. He will always love you. But I think that he's also concerned about looking like an embarrassed piece of crap. Which doesn't really look good, because Trump seems to be really concerned about things like leadership and being with winners. And therefore, he is going to bet on Russia, and he's going to bet on Ukraine, and he's going to send Kellogg to Rome, and he's going to talk to Putin. He's hedging his bets. But in the end, he's going to be with a strong one. And if Ukraine can knock off Putin and show that it has the strength, then Trump will give up on Putin just like that. Thinking back to his failed relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the fallout there wasn't all the legal troubles that Epstein had. It's the fact that Jeffrey Epstein bid $36 million on some mansion in Florida, showed it to Trump. Trump thought that was pretty cool, went behind his back and bet and put $40 million offered for this mansion and got it. And after that, he and Jeffrey Epstein just stopped being the best of friends that they were for 15 years, according to Epstein's and Trump's biographer, Michael Wolff. So we have a lot of kind of pieces of information to see how things are going to develop. But I think we're starting to see some possibility for break between the Trump administration and Kremlin, although Trump administration remains full of people very friendly to Putin, and how that be interesting to watch. But let's keep in mind that in 2019, Putin was all for Zelensky, because he thought that Zelensky was going to be the man that will make peace with Russia and give Russia what it wanted. When it turned out that Zelensky was worse than than Putin anticipated, he invaded. So I think we're looking at a situation where possibly another relationship is deteriorating, we're just going to see where this one takes us.
Russia offers new approach to anti-Ukraine war, says Rubio, a new and different approach to the settlement of the war in Ukraine, which will be conveyed to U.S. President Donald Trump, said U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio during a press conference after his meeting with Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov. How can we assess this meeting? What is the key goal of it, and what new approach can Russia offer? Russia, which wants only one thing, to continue the war. And the same Lavrov a few days ago told again that the main goals of Russian Federation is denazification and demilitarization without any changes.
Correct. And therefore, it's hard to imagine that a new offer from Russia is going to be different than the old offer from Russia. They think they still are going to win because they got the president in place that's going to take away military aid from Ukraine. Europe is not sufficient to support Ukraine. And sooner than later, Putin is going to have his victory in Ukraine. And there was even a rumor a couple of months ago, I believe, that Putin is putting the word out that he wants to to have the singer who made a famous song in the 80s, Felicita Powell, I believe, that he wanted him to plan performing in a big celebration in September. So as far as Putin is concerned, things are going to according to plan, and the parade is still on schedule and in place. However, reality, as often, is getting in the way of those plans because Putin constantly overestimates himself. He overestimated himself when he thought that he could take Kiev in 3 days, and he overestimates himself again and again. Marco Rubio here is in a fairly carefree position because he makes no decisions. His job is probably to just relay the information from Lavrov to White House as quickly as possible. And it's really interesting when you think about where's policy being made in the United States, but military policy, because it does take us back to somebody like Elbridge Colby. Because we think about Donald Trump, well, he just wants to have good relations with Putin and make deals. Marco Rubio, in two capacities, as Secretary of State and as his national security advisor, makes no decisions and responsible apparently for nothing. He actually has two other jobs, but that's besides the point. Pete Hegseth appears everywhere with his wife, possibly to prevent him from drinking heavily. We don't know. And who else is there? Oh, Tulsi Gabbard. Oh, she is influential. No, she disagreed with Trump about Iran, and so I think she's not allowed in the room now. So who else is there? So, I mean, CIA, we have... I think just the mere fact that the person in charge of HR at White House, Sergio Gore, has so much influence and has no traceable roots from his parents, although the latest information is that apparently he was born in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, according to Times of Malta, which is very interesting because Tashkent is, just like he said, it's not part of Russia, it's part of Uzbekistan, but both were part of USSR. And that's the person who is in charge of HR for this administration. So we see that there's real decision makers are those deep state functionaries who are actually sending out orders that people like Pete Hegseth will sign without thinking. Who knows if he was sober at the time? I'm sure he was. I'm just saying reputation, stereotypes, they are there. And it's his reputation that he has to deal with. But apparently that's fine for Department of Defense under 47th President of the United States. So it's really confusing for people who are even trying to cover policy who is in charge here. And I think the results are not encouraging, but they are revealing. And transparency and clarity, I think, is first and paramount concern and priority that we should have.
And Yuri, in general, when we see that Vladimir Putin believes that Donald Trump will love him forever and support him forever, is he right, Russian dictator, about it?
I think it's a good question because it seems that Trump is frustrated. Trump wants what he wants. He wants the war to stop. Yes. Putin wants Ukraine. And yet at the same time...
Yes. And Europe and another countries of NATO. Putin wants a lot of countries, not only Ukraine. Sorry.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Putin has a big menu and big appetite, and for all we know, he could be around for another, 20 years. He looks kind of healthier than American president, by some measure, and he's younger too. So I think that there's possibilities. Like I said, I feel like we're in a precipice because it's going to be pretty difficult. It's going to be kind of unsustainable to continue to love Putin without Putin loving him back. Now, I do not expect that this will mean that the United States will magically send weapons to Ukraine. I think this is really such a long shot that I would say it's unlikely because what we see right now are talks about America and Ukraine, about arms production, and things that will take years before they are showing results, and that's not the situation that Ukraine is now. Therefore, I can see United States maybe less likely to take the side of Russia in this one. After all, Putin is so frustrating, but still not taking the side of Ukraine simply because, well, that would make things with Putin even worse. And in the meantime, we seem to be running out of all sorts of things that that we have so little that we can't even help anybody. So I think that love feelings between Trump and Putin, from Trump to Putin, will remain. But policy-wise, I feel like we're on a cusp of a new chapter here.
Yuri, thank you very much. We'll see. Thank you for this conversation, for your position, all your thoughts. See you next week. Take care, please.
Thank you.
Yuri Rashkin, TV host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English. My name is Irina Uzlova. Thank you guys for joining us and watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channels, Yuri Rashkin and War and Politics 24. And see you next week.